New Mexico's got a lot of interesting stuff that happens out there. I hear a lot of weird stories from out there. For some reason, I don't know why, but it seems to be a magnet for the strange.
Well, that's when my world got turned upside down when I had a near death experience out there. I had a cabin up in the mountains, the Pecos Wilderness, and I used to with my cousin would frequent. He had a place down in South Africa, and I'd just been down there for like 2 months, and it's a long flight back.
Hmm.
And I didn't know it, but I acquired a DVT in my leg, which is a deep vein thrombosis, which is blood clot.
Mm.
I used to be a big time snowboarder. I might have had an injury or something in my calf, but it created this blood clot, and I didn't know it. And I had a cabin up in the mountains. You want me to go into this real quick? It'll take about 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay. Uh, yeah, I used to train Labradors and stuff, and I had one of my pups up there being taken care of by a neighbor, which is half a mile away. It's very remote, about 8,000 feet up
Hmm.
off the headwaters of the Pecos River. Anyway, so I go up there and I, get my dog back, go back to my cabin. It's just me and my dog. And it was June 16th of 2002. And the blood clot broke on Sunday morning. I think I'd called my dad to wish him a happy Father's Day,
Mm.
and gave me a double pulmonary embolism.
Mm.
And of course, with that, I just collapsed. And that was a Sunday morning. They were guessing around 10 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't found until Wednesday at about 6 o'clock.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I'd been, yeah, I was laying in the cabin on the floor for basically 4 days.
Whoa.
Um, no food, no water, whatever. My dog eventually broke out of the screen door, and the people that had been taking care of her were walking up in the upper trail, and she ran up to them. And I was supposed to leave on Monday, and now it's Wednesday, late afternoon.
Mm.
They're like, what's Paul still doing here? And they came down and found me, and you can imagine I was quite the mess. I was like a bloated
Wow.
cow on the side of the road. Everything
Wow.
that could be wrong was wrong. Sepsis, double pneumonia. I can go over the 107 fever. I was, in a coma, just breathing very fast. Had jaundice. I was swollen. I was bleeding out of my orifices. All my organs were breaking down. So I was in bad shape.
Wow. That is great. Were you basically like in a coma?
Oh, I was in a coma for sure.
Man, that is crazy. I didn't realize it was
Probably,
like that.
I probably had been in one for a while because, getting a pulmonary embolism even in the hospital is tough. I had a double, and then all the other stuff started manifesting from the injury, and I was just, I was breaking down, and I was, basically dead. And so they found me, and they're cutting my clothes off because they're all stretched out because I was swollen and all
Mm.
that, and trying to figure out what was going on. They tried to life flight me out. The winds were too heavy, so they had to get an ambulance up there. And so, it's getting close to dusk up there, and they put me in the ambulance, and all of a sudden I come to.
Hmm.
And I'll never forget this because I just sit up on the gurney. And the other thing was I was completely paralyzed on my right side because I'd been laying on my femoral nerve and it killed it. And so I was paralyzed.
Wow.
So I really wasn't able to sit up is what I'm getting at. But I sat up and they all just freaked out. Now, what I was seeing was this gray fog, but I was seeing 360. I could see behind me, in front of me. I could feel everything.
Hmm.
It was the strangest thing in the world. I just felt all their emotions, the chaos. They were like, "What are you doing?" and, and they just started, asking me all these questions, like, you've been doing drugs, what's going on? What's your last memory? And I started kidding around with them, because I was just trying to like calm the situation down a little bit. And then finally, one of the paramedics, I guess, there was two in front of me, and then I could even see the driver for whatever reason. And then one guy reached his hand out and grabbed my hand and said, Paul, you need to get serious with us. You're dying right now. And I just said,
Wow.
in response to that, I said, well, we're all dying. There was no time. It was the strangest thing. And right when I said that, everything started to particleize. I'll never forget this. The wall of the ambulance just started going into particles, and I could see all these zillions of particles. I could see I was on the headwaters of the Pecos River, and I saw these huge ponderosa trees just swirling in this. You ever seen those birds that fly in formation? You know, they just these zillions of particles were just but consuming everything,
Wow.
including me. So I was becoming part of all of this, and
Eh,
you know, and just all of a sudden, boom, in no time because there wasn't time, but all of a sudden I was just floating in this area I call it was like the edge of infinity. It was this multi-dimensional area, and I I didn't have the traditional near-death experience where I was, you know, riding a unicorn, jumping through rainbows, and talking to Jesus. This was more about quantum physics, particle physics. I was like floating in this spot, and I was watching these zillions of these white lights doing the same thing the particles were doing earlier, and they were going in formation. There's this real bright core that they were flying into, um, and I was being held, and something was behind me. It wasn't bad. It was very comforting, in fact, very loving. But they didn't want me to go anywhere. They were just holding me. And while this was taking place, I had a 2 to 3 tier orb that was circling me, going around. I felt like I was being like I felt like a car at the pit stops, you know, getting refueled or something. I
Right.
felt like I was being downloaded or something. I don't know. But
Wait, real
they
quick,
just,
real quick. When you say the core, like it's all flowing into one, like a vortex of sorts.
yes,
Interesting.
yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, it was definitely like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Sorry to cut you off. I was just curious
No,
about that
that's
image.
no, that's fine, and that's pretty much the. It wasn't that exciting. That I just that's what I remember. Um, you know, I've had a little bit come back after that, but you know, the next minute I know I'm waking up in the hospital a week later, and that was
Wow.
hell. But I just felt really off. You know, I felt like I was either before time, after time. I was even telling people this, and you know, back in these days, I was agnostic. I didn't believe in anything really. I just, you know, I just making my way by things. You know, I just, you know, I didn't believe in palm readers. You know, and so this has been an evolution for me. You know, going through that, after that I did believe there was a creator for sure. Um, and then, you know, we can fast forward up to, you know, 2016, where, you know, I had a lot of stuff happen between. I had a couple more near death experiences that aren't really worth talking about, but I was on the edge of dying. I'm through all these issues I had with blood thinners and all this stuff. But then in
Wait,
2016,
Paul.
I just kind of woke up. I just started having all these bizarre things happening.
Paul. Before we get to
And
Paul, if you can hear me, if before we get to 2016, was there a story about trees affected or connected to the
well, yeah, let me back up again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was strange because after I got out of the hospital, it took me about 6 months to recoup enough. I was in a wheelchair. I had to redo my leg. It took forever just to get
Wow.
walking again.
Right.
Finally went back up to my cabin, brought my dog up there, and I was just introducing myself back up there. But there was all these blue marks on the trees out in front of the cabin because I had about 40 yards or 30 yards between the cabin and the river, and the trees were real dense in there. And anyway, so I called up the Forest Service because this was 100-year lease land, and I said, "Hey, this is Paul, you know, so and so cabin." And they said, "Are you up there?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "We'll be right up." And this is like an hour away for them. And these two Suburbans pull up from the Forest Service. They get out in all their little uniforms and stuff. And it's like, what's going on here? And
Uh-oh.
they came up to me and said, "Hey, we've been wanting to talk to you about these trees. Did you do something to them?" I said, "No, I didn't." Because I'd built a pond there I wasn't supposed to do one time. You know, I had to fill it back in. So
Mm.
anyway, and they said, "Well, you probably noticed the marks. You know, they've died, and all those trees were alive. You know, 6 months earlier. And some of these trees are 3 foot diameter ponderosa trees. I
Mhm.
mean, big ones and smaller ones." And I just said, "Well, have you checked for like bark beetles and stuff?" And anyway, so we didn't get much done in that conversation. I think I let him. I was pretty clear that I didn't poison him or anything to, you
Right.
know, make a better view for the river or whatever. I didn't do anything to him. But then I got thinking about it. Those were the same exact trees I saw particle eyes,
Hmm.
and all these. It was weird because where the ambulance was parked, about a 30-yard radius, the trees they're like burnt, like radiation burnt. There's 2 trees left against the cabin, big ponderosas, like 5-footers in diameter, and they were burnt. It's hard to explain, but they were just like there was a hot fire next to them at one point, and I don't know if they'll eventually die or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm not speculating anything. I'm just telling what happened. You know, why did all these trees die? They didn't know. They did soil samples. They did for bark beetles. They didn't have any reasons why they died either. I was able to cut them down and have a lot of firewood, but that was the outcome of that. You know, did something happen? Those were the same trees I saw particleize. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And when you say particleize, you mean like they're just dissolving, it's like reality shredding is how you remember it in your head.
Yeah, it's basically what we are. You know, we're just a bunch of particles.
Right.
You know, and I just saw that go like in reverse motion or something. I saw everything go. I saw that happening.
That is interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting detail to that whole story. Like I don't obviously have an answer, but
I don't either.
Some people tell these stories and they say there's some type of weird energy release, you know. And the way you tell your story, there's a moment where you shoot up, and it's almost like an impossible thing to do, you know.
Let me give you maybe an analogy to this. They're always trying to figure out how the shroud is. It's called the Shroud of Turin, the cloth that was
the Shroud of Turin.
Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that there's some type of radiation we don't know about that makes that kind of thing happen?
Right.
You know, when you die or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. No, and that's been in the news a lot lately. Admittedly, I don't know too much about it, but I wish I did. But that's what they say, as far as I know, you know. And but other people will say there's a similar type of energy release, you know, when these events happen. And yours is particularly strange in terms of like half of your body's paralyzed after 4 days of laying there on the floor, and you're able to shoot up in your memory, and then the way you're seeing things, and then it sort of connects to whatever happened out there. And who knows? Did you ever talk to the other people who kind of found you afterwards, and did they give you any extra details?
They just said you're dying, you know. You were like really sick, you know, and they said I was in a coma. They just told me everything I pretty much told you all, because I wasn't awake to, you know, know any of this other than the time I woke up in the ambulance, which was crazy. In fact, I bumped into the people that were in that ambulance a few months after that, and they looked at me like I was a ghost, like, you're not dead. When they dropped me off at the hospital, they thought I was dead.
Wow.
And I talked to them a little bit about it. But, you know, I want to throw one more thing that's interesting also. I found out through the cabin was built back in 1947, and I found out that Oppenheimer used to stay in that cabin.
Well,
he used to love that area up there, and he ended up putting Los Alamos where Los Alamos is, but he ended up getting a ranch up there. I think he stayed in there when he got kicked out of Los Alamos after dropping the bomb. I talked to the original builder's daughter, who was at the time 50 or 40 years old then. But she had said that, he frequented that cabin a bit.
And again, where was this?
This is up in the Pecos Wilderness. It's north of Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Okay. Interesting. I also believe, and I could be wrong, those listening could correct me, but I believe Wernher von Braun lived in New Mexico before he went to NASA, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that took place out there, especially White Sands in those areas.
Yeah, it's a weird place. He wrote a book out there about, you know, colonizing Mars. That's a whole other rabbit hole I talk about all the time. But he did write it out there, and it's very strange. He spent his time there after World War II, between going to take over NASA. There's just an interesting thing about there. So, okay, that's a crazy experience. Thank God you're alive. And that's 2002, right?
2000, right.
And then you have a fairly normal decade and a half until 2016, it sounds like.
I can't say it wasn't normal at all, but I'm not going to go into all that. It's not that interesting to anybody else probably, but it was different. Let's just say I had a lot of experiences that I kind of figured out later, because I was you know, just a little wigged out for a while, I have to say.